Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn in rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men know at their end that dark is right, because their words forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in the green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men, who caught the sun and sang in flight, and learned, too late, they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes can blaze like meteors and be happy. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my Father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas, 1914 to 1953. This was one of the greatest poems by one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, Dylan Thomas. It penetrates deep into the reader's subconscious psyche, and each time it is repeated, it reveals deeper and deeper meaning. Hi, I'm Kenneth K. Brown, PhD in Biomedical Sciences. As a member of Toastmasters for 28 years, I achieved the Advanced Toastmasters Silver skill level of public speaking in their legacy program. The recital interpretation of this poem started as a project from the Toastmasters Manual of Public Speaking. This is my interpretation of what made this poem so great. First of all, as shown in this slide, the poem's structure was a classical villanelle format with an organizational introduction, body, and conclusion, with a repeating double-strand refrain as shown. The first refrain, A1, do not go gentle into that good night, and refrain A2, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Both refrains are stated in the introduction, then alternately repeated in the body, and then together again in the conclusion, driving home the poem's theme by repetition. Repetition of the theme of this poem helped make it so penetrating. Penetrating as a religious devotee repeating the rosary. Secondly, the refrain have key words of good night and dying of the light that are brilliant metaphors of death that anyone can understand. Good night invokes the unconscious image of death as falling off to sleep. And dying of the light provokes the image of turning off a light or snuffing out a candle. These words together invoke the last words a person may hear before falling asleep at night. Good night, lights out. A third metaphor of death is found in the introduction line between the refrains, close of day, and that invokes the image of sunset. Three picturesque metaphors, that close of day, saying good night, and dying of the light, invoke unconscious imageries of death as an inevitable sunset, turning off the light and falling asleep. The use of poetic metaphors made this poem deeply understandable to the recipients. The repeating frames have a thou shalt not and a thou shalt message. In the first refrain, the word gentle is the same as in gentleman, one who is passive and meek and well-mannered. The first refrain says, thou shalt not passively or in a well-mentored way accept death. The second refrain message is a thou shalt message. Thou shalt rage against death. In other words, go out kicking and screaming. The introduction sentence found between the first refrains revealed the cause of death as old age. As painful as burn and rave, an inflamed burn is one of the most painful wounds a person can get. This introduces the suffering from pain associated with the sentences of aging, besides death itself. So the introduction leaves the reader with a sense of despair, like telling them life sucks and then you die. However, the body of the poem uplifts by telling a story of 4 men and their antidotes to despair, with the possible side effects of the antidote as guilt. The 4 men are wise men in stanza 2, good men in stanza 3, wild men in stanza 4, and grave men in stanza 5. Each person reveals how they found meaning in life, and each person reveals that that could also result in guilt. With meaning and guilt, this poem now becomes a psychological poem. The poem is now not just about the physical pain of old age and death, but also the psychological pain of guilt. Because the poem contains principles of psychology with the subject of meaning and guilt, the poem can be interpreted through the theory of the psychiatrist Dr. Viktor Frankl and his equation D is equal to S minus M. The Frankl equation says that a person's despair, D, is equal to their suffering, S, minus their meaning in life, M. Despair is hopelessness or fertility. A person's despair is equal to their suffering. The more suffering, the more despair. However, meaning is an antidote to suffering. The increase in meaning overshadows suffering and turns despair into hope. Suffering comes from life's tragedy, or the tragic triad, as Frankl called it: pain, death, and guilt. The first stanza introduced pain and death of old age and death. The body now introduces the third of the tragic triad as guilt. The body will also now present 4 people with their meaning and guilt. Frankl also said 3 things give people meaning in life. 1, creative expression, and A, word, or B, deed. 2, experiences. And 3, their very attitude or perspective of life. Each person in the body finds meaning in one of these 4 ways, and each found it could also produce guilt. It is commonly agreed that Wiseman here describes intellectuals who find meaning through knowledge, as spoken or written words. Like the biologist who matter-of-factly says death is part of the biological lifestyle. Wise men know that Dark is right. They find comfort in knowledge. However, wise men can suffer the pain of guilt if their words fork no lightning, producing no influence. There is nothing more painful to an intellectual than to have their theories ignored or laughed at, or their publications rejected. There are the Gandhis whose words freed millions, and there are the Jim Joneses whose words lead people to drink Kool-Aid. Stanza 3. It is commonly agreed that good men describe the person who finds meaning in life by doing good deeds, like Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb to brighten up the world. The good deeds person suffers regret that their frail deeds made no ripples in the green bay of life. The good man whose deeds fail finds regret or guilt, like the Ford Motor Company and the Etzel. Wild men find meaning in life by experiencing life to its fullest, and don't need their words to fork lightning or their deeds to dance in the green bay. Wild men find meaning in life through personal experience. The wild man partied and sang from sunrise to sunset, having a good time. Wild men experience the Epicurean good life, the pleasures of hedonism, the thrill of the adventure of checking off the bucket list. Whatever this wild man did, he was guilty of spending his time in the wrong place. Nothing more painful than to miss out on what mattered most in life. He was unfulfilled and did not go gentle into that good night, like possibly the billionaire who sacrifices his marriage and family to experience success. The grave man is the person who finds meaning from insight into what matters most in their lives. A common report of near-death experiences is that one can see their whole life passing before them. The grave man nears death sees what matters most to them. While their physical eyesight is failing, they now have 20/20 insight. Blind, but seeing what matters most in life, their insight blazes like meteors and makes them happy. Too bad it takes a lifetime to gain this insight. The concept of what matters most is interpreted through another great person, time management legend Stephen Covey. He surveyed the world over on what mattered most, and 95% of the people he encountered, irrespective of race, creed, color, nationality, religion, said family mattered most. This insight, finding what matters most to you, takes a person from despair to happiness. I think, looking back at the body here, those four men were Dylan himself. As a wise man, Dylan's words forked lightning in his poetry. As a good man, his poems rippled in the green bay of history. As a wild man, his poems experienced what mattered most in life. As a grave man, Dylan, he had the insight into what mattered most in his life. And that brings us to the conclusion, where we are transported to his up-close and personal scene of him at his father's deathbed. Dylan and his father are at the father's sad height, his deathbed. It's sad that the height of all our work and effort is death. Dylan pleads to his father's face to get his attention. Curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. In other words, don't die. Don't leave me that easy. Fight to stay with me. Frankl is quoted to say, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I think old age and death takes everything away from a person. Their words no longer fork lightning. Their deeds are frail. They are no longer a wild man. And they only have those around them at their deathbed. But one thing is left, the last of the human freedoms. I think Dylan was giving his father the last of the human freedoms. The freedom to choose his attitude towards dying of the light, to defy death. Frankl called this ability to choose to rage against the inevitable suffering. He called it the defiant power of the human spirit. One cannot stop death, but as long as a person has consciousness, a heartbeat, and breath, they can choose their attitude towards death, to rage and rage against the dying of the light. And that gives them the defiant power of the human spirit to die with meaning. The poem concludes with Dylan's last message to his father on his father's deathbed, up close and personal for us to witness. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.